lower house of France's parliament has approved a draft resolution that calls hate of Israel a form of anti-Semitism. The draft, which kicked off weeks of debate in the French media, also called on the government to join other European nations in adopting the definition of anti-Semitism of the International Holocaust Remembrance Alliance. The IHRA definition states that some forms of vitriol against Israel, including comparing it to Nazi Germany, are examples of anti-Semitism, though criticizing Israel's policies is not. France, which is home to the world's third largest Jewish community, has seen a rise of 74% in anti-Semitic incidents year on year in 2018, according to numbers from Jewish organizations in the country. With me now in studio to discuss are Yariv Oppenheimer, project director for the Two-State Coalition, the Geneva Initiative, and former director of Peace Now, and Olga Deutsch, vice president of NGO Monitor. Thank you both for joining me for this. Olga, I want to begin with you. First of all, how do you see the French Parliament passing this resolution? A smart move, seeing the dramatic numbers of anti-Semitic incidents in the country?
Well, I think it's a very welcome decision by the French Parliament, especially after weeks of controversial debates and some pushback from various stakeholders in the wake of increased anti-Semitism globally and in Europe particularly. I think it is only wise of the French Parliament to join a list of 13 other parliaments in Europe that have already adopted the working definition. It is also important to mention that this is rather a symbolic gesture by the French Parliament. France has been a member of the International Holocaust Remembrance Alliance since 1999, and actually on the level of government has been implementing the IHRA working definition for years. So this is merely a political statement by the Parliament that says we too join other countries, including the European Parliament, that adopted a similar resolution last year.
So, Yariv, what are organizations that wrote to the National Assembly president saying this could damage organizations or human rights groups who want to defend the rights of maybe Palestinians, and making freedom of expression, according to their own letter, a form of accusing someone of anti-Semitism? Olga says this is a symbolic move. It maybe draws the line with other European allies, and it's required in light of rising anti-Semitism across Europe, really.
I think it's counterproductive, because eventually what this law is saying is that if you are criticize the state of Israel, or if you are even against the idea, the political idea of the state of Israel, I'm in favor, but there are people that are against, immediately they are not able to speak out because it's anti-Semite. No, anti-Semite is to hate Jews, whatever they are. And anti-Israeli or anti-Israeli policy is a political issue that can be debatable. I can defend, for example, the existence of the state of Israel as a Jewish state, but also a democratic one, but I cannot defend the settlements movement. And eventually, when we are doing such a move, we are actually helping the extremists that are really anti-Israelis to gain more support, because this move is not relevant. The relevant thing here is that because of the Israeli policy, to all the Palestinians, to all the Israeli Arabs, to all the idea of democracy, because Israel neglected in the last 10 years the term democracy in favor of the, instead we are taking the Jewish state above it. So the outcome of that is that people in the world don't want to see themselves part of the movement that support the state of Israel. And they don't want to be blamed of anti-Semite because they have political conflict with the state of Israel, as the state of Israel designed and shaped itself in the last few years. We should change the policy in order to lower the flames and to lower anti-Semite incident. We cannot just make a law saying you are not allowed to say it, and then we can be living fine, happily ever after, thinking that we solved the problem.
Olga, do you agree that there's a way this could backfire against Israel's interests?
I beg to differ. It's almost like saying, let me be less Jewish so they would hate me less. First of all, it is not a law. This is adoption of a resolution that includes calling for the French government to implement a non-binding working definition on anti-Semitism. It is extremely important. Let me translate that to you. When a police officer is facing a crime in the street, a kid who just started his career, and there's an incident of someone in front of a synagogue, and how is he supposed to know if it's an anti-Semitic crime or if it's not? There needs to be a canon, there needs to be a universal definition what constitutes anti-Semitism. By the way, right-wing, neo-Nazi, or left-wing anti-Semitism, all hatred of the Jews. Now, we can criticize the policies of the State of Israel. Moreover, it is more than welcome in any democracy, including ours. I mean, we're looking at third elections. I think we have proven to everyone that we are at least a thriving democracy.
Not everyone are voting in this election. The Palestinians living in the West Bank are not voting. The Palestinians living in East Jerusalem are not voting. The capital of the State of Israel, half of the populations are not voting. So it's not exactly...
Denying Jews the right for self-determination, denying Jews for their own state is ultimately anti-Semitic. And I think this is where the line is drawn. The working definition stipulates very clearly criticizing the State of Israel, just like any other state would be criticized, is not anti-Semitic. But singling it out, calling it Nazi, calling it an apartheid regime or endeavor is anti-Semitic. Blaming all Jews around the world for the policies of the State of Israel.
Eventually the issue is that the Israeli right wing and its allies around the world are trying to silence everyone that are opposing the policy of the government of Israel that in favor of settlements, right wing, etc. And this is another way to silence them and to say this a statement on these views are not legitimate. It's come together with saying that labeling products from the settlements is anti-Semitic. I'm saying it all the time, and this is another step. Because immediately the next step will be...
Where do you see settlements as a word mentioned?
Because immediately, if it will mention, maybe it will not get a majority, but immediately, the day after, the strategy will be, and this is what the right wing are doing, including NGO Monitor, to say that if you are not only against Israel, if you are against the settlements or the West Bank, the existence of Israel in the West Bank, immediately you are part of the BDS, and then you are anti-Semite, and you are maybe a self-hating Jew, and this is the policy.
BDS is,
nothing to do with BDS?
It has nothing to do with BDS. Some of the BDS movements adopt some of the anti-Semitic narratives, in which cases they should be sanctioned as anti-Semitics way beyond any healthy political discourse. What is important to say, the International Holocaust Remembrance Alliance is an alliance of 33 states, all EU member states. 13 parliaments have already adopted. It's a matter of political consensus. And more than that, it is extremely dangerous not to address anti-Semitism. Only less than a month ago, the EU Fundamental Rights Agency issued their annual report benchmarking the rise of anti-Semitism to the working definition. And what did it find? One of the gravest findings of this report was actually that most of the countries don't know how to record whether there are and how many anti-Semitic incidents are. Most of the anti-Semitism, most of the people hit by it are actually Jews in diaspora. So we need to distance it from the policies of Israel and the right or left discourse.
When you look at the far right, it's very easy to recognize and to see what is anti-Semite, because usually it's come with anti-Muslim and anti-foreigners, and it's come together, it's the same family.
We agree.
But when you look at the left side, you see that mostly the people that are anti-Israel, they are not anti-Semite. They are anti the idea of a Jewish state rather to be a democratic one. They are against the idea of that the Palestinian living in this area doesn't have the same rights like you and I. And this is the issue here. It's not about anti-Jewish. It's about anti-policy of the government
for Palestinian rights, and it is a healthy political discourse while you're not anti-Semitic.
Before we wrap, I just want to ask you, do you think, though, that a resolution like this can help in real time in the field cutting down anti-Semitic incidents in France in this case?
I do, because the core, the essence of the working definition and IRA on itself as an alliance is actually education. It is about educating police officer, judicial system, all the different elements of the government, what constitutes modern anti-Semitism. And it is extremely important, again, to say left, right, it doesn't matter from which part of the political spectrum it comes. When you hate Jews, you should be called out as an anti-Semite.
The only way to lower the anti-Semite events is to change the policy and to come back to the core value of the society that we wish to be, a democratic one with human rights, with no settlements, a peaceful one. This is the way to really to change the reality in Europe. Not just laws that we can clap, but most of the people will just ignore. ignore it.
All right, Yariv Oppenheimer and Olga Deutsch, it was an insightful and illuminating discussion. Thank you both for joining me for this.